Hi, I'm Leslie, and this is my practice presentation addressing the problem of client labeling and disruption in a highly structured therapeutic setting. But to break it down a little, the actual stuck point I experienced as a practitioner was disruption in a highly structured setting. From an agency standpoint, we were responsible for dealing with client labeling and the setting. And from a strengths-based perspective, I'll be focusing on creative solutions in structured environments. So the setting is a county mental health agency, and the population is the proverbial special or interesting clients, often labeled by diagnosis as clients with borderline personality disorder. But this could really refer to any client with overt behavioral presentations. And to be fair, my agency was really struggling with not labeling these clients, hence the prescribed intervention, which was dialectical behavior therapy. This is a highly successful intervention designed for this population, combining group skills training with individual therapy and agency-wide consultation. My role is group skills educator and co-facilitator. The rationale for DBT structure is significant effects in reducing self-harm and suicidality, with structured intervention for populations with borderline personality disorder. Consistently enhanced effects over CBT, the next best thing. Preserving therapeutic alliances by splitting interaction between multiple therapists, including a group co-facilitator, to manage expected distractions and disruption in group, with expected representing a naturalistic validating reactance approach to client behavior, Rooney, 2009. And enhancing intertherapeutic processes, systemic client validation, and advocacy through agency-wide consultation, Linehan, 1993 and 1995, Walsh, 2010. And that pretty well addresses the problem of client labeling. A critical factor in working with this population is definitely attitude. And I've tried to represent this dynamic with a little entertainment value for our last class, but actual client presentations are real, a little extreme, and in no way intended to mock or demean. This is actually just my experience. But let's meet a client already, right? So this is Mary, and she's a little buffer than the woman in this picture, and she was a notorious bell ringer. Remember that warning? And this drove support staff nuts. And boy, did they like to hype me meeting her, just like Shulman said last term, 2010. So our first meeting went like this. Hey, Mary. She said, how do you know my name? And I said, well, because it's part of my job to know who everybody is, I guess. And she said, oh. But then she sat by me in group. So the next time I saw her, she'd missed a group, and I said, hey, Mary, how's it going? She said, why do you want to know? And I said, well, because I missed you last week, I guess. I think I really just wanted to know how you're doing. And she said, oh. Then she actually smiled a little. Then she actually smiled a little in group and laughed a little and started to engage in it. And then she just worked on her DBT skills for the next few weeks. The next week in staffing, everybody said, oh my gosh, what'd you do to Mary? She's doing so well. But I didn't really do anything. She did. And that's just an example of reactance approach and tuning in, supporting the regular function of DBT. But to ratchet it up a notch, this is our actual group room, and I really do sit here when I'm co-facilitating. And every other week or so, I do a little song and dance up here if I'm leading. And for some reason, we always have two group members who sit right here, regardless of who they are, and engage in distraction across the table. And maybe a few more on really kooky days. And this is what that looks like. Remember that warning again. like a pencil ball, played with extensively, like pinky finger hoedown day, and eventually it'll get hung across that table. And this never happened, but let's try to relate, right? So these are examples of distraction, and they illustrate the basic sexual marker. DBT is not a process. DBT is a skill training mode. The great thing about distraction is that it's an excellent opportunity to actually practice your focusing skills with groups. Distraction, however, is the real set point for the actual term on formal billing notes. In this case, it's related to process digressions, hence the skills focus versus process focus. And it looked like this. So this is Soraya, not Sarah, as she tends to introduce herself, and she was struggling with, quote, uninterruptible tangential digressions to personal process, monopolizing approximately 60 to 80% of group, as I wrote it up in my notes over time. This started out like this. Yeah, well, what if nobody lets you do that? And you can't even make them do anything about it either. But you would be just fine if they would just listen when you're trying to fix it. Our first line response was, well, Soraya, like the book says, we really only have control over ourselves. And like your workbook says, we may not always cause all of our problems, but we still have to live with them, right? But these regular refocusing techniques consistently didn't work over time, despite consultation with her individual therapist and, synthetically, Soraya herself. This eventually digressed to situations like this. Oh yeah, well, I don't even like bologna, actually, or chocolate, or peanut butter for that matter. So, what if you can't even do distress tolerance because your daughter won't stop eating peanut butter? You're just freaking out because you can't make her stop, and she says, well, this is all we have right now, and she doesn't even care that you are completely traumatized by orange juice, and the peanut butter is totally triggering you because they both grow, duh, and you eat them, duh, or drink one of them, I guess, whatever. And anyway, you can't even make her give a crap. And it just went on like this. So I just tried to tune into what was really bothering Soraya, and I eventually struck on the idea of prescribing chain analysis in her individual therapy, specifically for the interpersonal problems that were really eating her lunch. What chain analysis does is break a behavior down into the thoughts, feelings, actions, and choices between a prompting event and the actual behavior. I then equated these partialized pieces of her problems to the cognitive regulation, emotional regulation, and distress tolerance skills, leading to the more advanced interpersonal effectiveness skills the group wasn't up to yet. It took a few tries, but I think this eventually built some engagement into the process for Soraya with some immediate reward. And then, of course, these skills are also the objective outcomes to the overarching DBT goal of improved quality of life. But I chose this example because chain analysis was really the most engaging activity we did in DBT other than mindfulness while I was learning diagnostic assessment and didn't have anything else to report on. And I noticed how I'd pathetically added color to try to spice up the presentation for my class. Eventually, of course, realized I needed to give it to the clients too, who loved it. But this got me thinking about creative ways to work on that structural barrier in DBT. Oh shoot, and this is of course how I addressed the actual stuck point of disruption, and started to broach the idea of dealing with the key criticism of DBT. The key criticism of DBT is the structural conundrum that structure can be so significantly effective or ineffective depending on therapeutic approach and the level of systemic positive regard. And since the little props I get to keep in my office or bring to group or talk to other practitioners about for really building engagement is one of the most fun parts of my job, I thought this is a great creative strengths-based way to really offset that necessary structural rigidity. And I'm really dying to get my classmates' creative input on this strengths-based spin on that problem. So my focus questions are, what are some of your favorite creative or entertaining intervention strategies you've used or observed in various practice settings? What are some of your favorite client quirks? And what creative or particularly effective advocacy techniques have you used, observed, or just wanted to try?